Good morning and welcome to the MTK podcast. Today is Tuesday, the 31st of October in the Western world 2023. And, I was saying 2567 BE in the last podcast, the first podcast. And I was going to kind of clarify that. In Thailand, in Cambodia, and much of Southeast Asia, I was traveling last year. And in fact, I'm going back here coming up soon. And they use the BE as opposed to CE, right? Buddhist era. And they call it 2567 because they use the enlightenment of the Buddha as their starting point. It is some 500 years before the birth of Christ, after all. And it has had a much greater influence throughout the world, if we're talking about real numbers of people. And certainly in Southeast Asia, it's a hugely important thing, more so than Christianity ever would be or will be. And Buddhism is very different, all over Asia. It's so stern and spare in Japan. And by comparison, in Cambodia, there's a living Buddhism, just like there is in Japan, but I saw something totally different, a calmness, a serenity, a beautifulness, Even when two people were arguing in the street over something, it was quiet. And if it got too loud, other Cambodians would come over to go, hey, what's going on? Let's calm this down. A living Buddhism I kind of saw there that was very different from the Japanese living Buddhism that I also experienced when I lived and traveled in Japan. All kinds of travel, it's really important that you learn to observe. My dad used to have a thing he did with his students. Usually at the beginning of the semester, they would come to class, they'd all be sitting there, and then he'd call one of them out and say, hey, where did you come here from? And the guy would say, oh, I live over on whatever part of town. And he would say, okay, well, tell me everything you saw today on your way here. And the person would be like, what? And he'd be like, well, what did you see on the way here? And then the guy or woman would be sitting there and they would be thinking, and the other students would be wondering where this is going. And they'd say, oh, well, I saw, the gas station over at the corner of this street, and I passed a Burger King, and I saw, that's it. And then my dad would say, all right, well, now, did you see that tree that had gotten burned? Or, oh, did you notice that there was a skid mark on the road near the corner of X Street and Y Street? And the student would start to be looking at them. So even when a student didn't reply, Dad would do that. He would say, okay, well, I'm going to tell you some things between your house and here that I remember from the last time I went and took that drive, if you will. And that's great because now there's a kind of focus, a change in focus. And I think that was what Dad was trying to get people to do. And I really appreciate that very much. You have to see the world around you. You have to slow down and use all your senses. You have to absorb and consume the data so you can think clearly about what is really going on. You want to fight a simulation? You want to keep talking about living in a simulation? Or do you want to fight the notion that somehow you're living in a simulation? The very first place to start is with observation of the actual world that you are passing through. And we should talk about how you're passing through it too. If I take the bus to go from one place to another and it takes 13 minutes, and if I walk and it takes 25 minutes, what's happening with those extra 12 minutes? If I spend the 12 minutes just sitting there going, oh my God, I wish I would have caught the bus. I should have been on that bus. That bus would have allowed me to get there faster. Then I'm wasting the extra 12 minutes of the walk. But if I'm absorbing that walk, and in that extra 12 minutes of walking, I'm seeing the world and bringing it into me as data, all of that information is going to help me. You have to trust that that's the case, but it's real. Time is a vector in travel. Time is a vector, and when you have more of it in travel, it's a great blessing. You have to learn how to observe. So let's all work on that. We move with cars and with buses and with motorcycles and scooters and through the environment with headphones on, and now there's televisions inside the cars. Televisions, what a 20th century term that's become. There are monitors and screens streaming inside the cars, right? And we're not looking around us. We're not aware of our environment. And Dad used to ask these students to be hyper aware. Tomorrow I want to hear every tiny change that happened, he would say, between your house and when you got to the classroom. And the student would be trying to find things that were different then. And that is the point, right? It creates in the mind an alertness, and that's where everything starts. You have to be alert to the world around you, not to the media coming in through your ears and eyes constantly in this country, telling you things that are 80% of which is nonsense, but alert to what is actually happening in the world around you. And that vector of time is incredibly important. When I worked closely with the great artist, brilliant genius of a man who goes by Rigo23, Rigo was the one who sat quietly in rooms full of very highfalutin types and big artists and big, janglies. And for those of you who don't know, I call rich people janglies. It comes from some term that was about their jewelry. I think maybe John Lennon said something, and then I morphed it, or maybe it is a Lennonism. I don't know. But, Rigo would hang out with the janglies, and he would just sit there. I would note how they would just flock around him and want to be around him and want to talk to him about his work and about this and that and the other. And he was so patient with time. He would sit and listen to them, and he would let it go on. And then he would make an observation about something that he had been observing while they were talking. It was so relevant to the moment, the actual moment we were in. I admired that very much about Rigo. Indeed, it was a lesson I learned, but I am not good at it. I don't execute it because I just, like everybody, I just keep moving too fast through the universe. So there's a lesson that my dad and then Rigo agreed on, though there's very few things that the two of them, I think, would have agreed on had they ever met. I don't know. But this is the 31st of October, and just like we were talking about the Buddhist calendar, I don't participate in any of the American holidays, even though I was raised here. Maybe it's because they forced us to make turkeys with our hands on a piece of paper at Thanksgiving and to cut pumpkins and send valentines to the girls in our class. But it was all manufactured, in the 50s or something. None of this has any age to it. So the more you invest in it, the more you're giving to a extremely plastic, artificial, very recent corporate invention, And Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, as they call it, is not, I've never liked it. I'm too honest to like a day like Halloween or April Fool's Day. In fact, I've become less fun because of my honesty. I don't find it fun or interesting. Of course, I don't call the Turkey Day the same thing as everyone else, since I think the early aughts, but I'm on the record at least as long as 2012. I call it thanks-taking. Thanks-taking, because they came, took everything, said thanks. That's what it is. It's not Thanksgiving. There was no giving going on. And we have massive reparations and restitution to make, including probably the tearing down of our entire Constitution in order to be really honest about all of this. I don't participate in the Xmas. I don't participate in the Hanukkah. I don't participate in the Kwanzaa. I don't participate in any of the calendar stuff. And it's not because I'm a Jehovah's Witness. It's not because I'm anti anything except corporate culture and the manipulation of people. That I don't like. I like when you think for yourselves. So let's make that the message of today's podcast. Go out there today and walk for a stretch and observe everything that you see and make a note of it. And then tomorrow, do it again. Add a few days of that and see what that does for you. All right? And think for yourself. Much love from the MTK.